You were walking through a wooded area one afternoon. It is a beautiful day and the air is warm. A slight breeze is blowing and you are feeling strong and adventurous. As you walk along, you notice birds in the trees, squirrels playing, and hear the sound of the wind stirring up dead leaves. The area you're in was a thoroughfare for travelers going west, but that was about 200 years ago. As you reach the crest of a hill, you look over a green valley. A silent river flows in the middle, and the sky is clear. This land seems familiar to you, even though you have never been here. It is more than déjà vu. You feel comfortable here, as if you've traveled through before or even lived here. You wonder if maybe it's a past life memory. Just within the range of your sight, you suddenly see a faint line of people behind a horse-drawn wagon. The vision lasts but a few seconds, a minute at most. Could it have been your imagination? Was it a vision of ghosts? Or has time slipped, allowing the past to come forward or you to travel briefly to a bygone time?
Hey, all you beach bunnies and surfer dudes, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad. The podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bence, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, pal.
Hey, man, long time, huh?
I know, dude. School's out for summer, bro.
I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a year that you actually got this much sun. Or at least I should say you were outdoors.
Yeah.
Enough. I mean, you're still kind of pasty.
Although it is kind of weird because I was like pretty tan and like it's just like reabsorbing back into my.
Yeah, see, my kids are the opposite. They got sunburned and then the next day it just turns into tan.
Yeah, my kids too. It's kind of
just
wild.
superior genetics. Anyway, I know it's been a couple weeks since we had a show, and for the most part, it's because Tyler and I both have taken our families on vacations, and we thought about kind of doing the run and gun sort of show from the road type thing, but we decided, you know what, let's just enjoy our vacation, and kind of just get even more prepared for what happens next week, which. Yeah. I don't know about you, man, but every year I get super excited around this time because the whole entire month of July, we are going to do our annual Camp Rad Strangeness.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, too, because so last year we did Camp Rad Strangeness International, and I'm really excited because this year, I don't think we should give it away quite yet, but I do think that I think you guys are going to really dig it because it's a little different than anything that we've ever done. Yeah.
And now I'm starting to get worried that I don't know what we're going to be doing. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I agree, man. And, there's a lot of our sort of fellow podcast friends and stuff do sort of a summer special type idea. And so, our own sort of internal challenge is to make sure that, we're not stepping on their toes and we came up with this really cool topic that I think is going to be, just going to be fun to talk about and dive into, man. Well, fun and also terrifying.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, before we dive into today's topic, dude, did you know this, man? I mean, I was literally this many years old. Is that right? Is that how the kids say it? When I found out that, Julie sent us this meme, and this is mind-blowing. It says, it's got Jason Voorhees in the background. And it just says, that moment when you realize that the next 5 months spell, and it spells out Jason. July, August, September, October, November.
What?
I mean,
dude.
Mind-blowing, right?
That is incredible. I mean, Wow. Yeah,
There's
I
a
never
lot of
had a
trash
clue.
talk about the internet. And for the most part, a lot of it's kind of true.
Yeah.
But my gosh, thank God for the internet because of the stuff like that. How have I not figured that one out yet before?
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I've never heard of that.
Even more reason why I'm so glad that I started diving back into those movies, although, boy, part 3, man.
Yeah.
All right, man, let's stay on track here. Today's topic, here's how it was born, all right? If you listened to our most previous show a couple weeks ago where we talked a little bit more about our sort of D&D campaign and the elements that I'm bringing into it, I think because we did like a Patreon preview of that episode. And there's elements of it, and if you've been a listener for any amount of time, you will know that my favorite topic in the world revolves around time travel. In any sense of the word, any kind of theory, I'm open to listening to it. I just love it.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to and have sort of sprinkled in elements of time travel capabilities within our own Dungeons & Dragons campaign that we're doing. And so with that said, while I was on vacation, I just kind of stumbled across this article from years past, and I was super enthralled. And so today, we're going to be talking about time slipping, or time slippage, I should say.
Yeah, time slippage. I like it.
And sort of the typical sort of archetypal time slip is when an individual perceives that they have, quote unquote, slipped into a different time period. Essentially just like this involuntary time travel moments. I mean, is that cool if we just dive straight in?
Yeah, dude, I think it's awesome.
And so, like, I think there's no better way to sort of just, I guess, explain it all and to kind of talk about what we're, or at least if you've never heard of time slippage, the best way I think is to just dive into some examples.
Yeah.
So let me give you one. In 1901, there are these two women, Miss Moberly and a Miss Jourdain, okay?
I know exactly what
this is a pretty famous one, right?
Yeah.
So they visited the mansion of Louis the 16th in Versailles, France. And while they were walking through the gardens, they found themselves sort of just in the middle of this scene from the 1700s. The people were dressed in costumes of that period. The music that they heard all of a sudden, the servants, the coaches, they were all consistent with that time period, the 1700s, the same time period of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. As these women left the garden, this quote-unquote vision disappeared also. And then again, they were back in 1901. Now, it's stuff like this, man, that, sure, science fiction existed back then. But this is the kind of story that I would expect to find online right now, on the Reddit threads or some sort of creepypasta website.
Right.
Not, two ladies that were walking around in 1901 and that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
And if I'm remembering correctly, I think one of the women was also like a pretty renowned professor at like a local university, I think, even.
I don't have those details, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I think so, because that was one of the things that this story came out like much later, because she was, I think she was kind of worried, about the backlash if she came out, publicly with all that.
And similarly, like we talk about this quite often as well, anybody that has any kind of encounter, be it supernatural or alien or, an encounter with a cryptid, hey, I think I might have seen this, or even just any kind of, hey, something was going on whenever I was a kid. I don't know what it was or whatever. There's always that sort of fear of talking about it publicly because, number one, people are going to think you're crazy potentially. And it's always when someone's brave enough to kind of share those experiences that I think, and they come from some sort of, high society or sort of disproving the, I guess, the typical stereotype for what that
stigma.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, yes, of course, there's people that have had mental health issues dating all the way back into 1901, and perhaps maybe one of them was having a psychotic break. But both of them at the same time. And it's not just, hey, there's people in costumes, but it's the music and all that stuff.
Which, by the way, like, as we know, if you're a longtime listener of the show, the people that I hate the most are the skeptics that use the mass hallucination
explanation.
Explanation to debunk, which is just like, come on, man. Like,
yeah. Well, I think, so too, the thing is, if it's one of the potential theories, if it's, in other words, if someone's presenting that to me as a possibility, okay, that sounds cool. I mean, that's also, we've talked about this before. It's equally as crazy and interesting. Yeah. I shouldn't say crazy, interesting.
Yeah.
But if it's the only one, they're like, nope, it was this, hard for me to swallow. But if they're like, well, this is a possibility. Oh, okay. But also, this is a possibility. Now, before we go any further, I will say, man, nowadays, I feel like I would still be in disbelief if I'm just walking down. I mean, I guess it would depend on the location, right? So if I'm in my neighborhood and I'm just on one of my early morning runs and all of a sudden I find myself inside of a 1700s like scene.
Yeah.
Or I guess in Georgia here, it would be like maybe like a Civil War battle or something crazy. Yeah, I'd be freaked out. But there's still a part of me that would be like, well, I guess I didn't get a notification, but maybe there's like a reenactment this week.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It would still be hard for me to like comprehend. If I was in France and this happened, I'd think, oh, these are just hired actors, you know?
Yeah, for sure. What's funny is, so if we're being transparent here, I actually had no idea what we were talking about today. I just got back from Florida with a family. I've come back to a busy week of just stuff and, kids being at home and stuff. So I had no idea. But it's pretty awesome that you brought this up because I actually ran across a story a while back, and I'm totally going to butcher it as far as the details, but it was along these same lines. And I thought it was so interesting because it was this girl was telling it, and she was telling it about her dad it was either like the late 90s or the early 2000s, during like the housing sort of collapse or whatever. So he worked for this like huge sort of national real estate agency, like company, where he was kind of like a scout, so he would go from like state to state in these areas and looking for these large like swaths of land, and then he would report back, and then this company would buy it and
develop it and
that whole kind of thing. I thought it was so interesting in this kind of way because so apparently like her dad did this, he went away on a work trip. I think she was like a teenager at the time, but it's been one of those things within their family where they still kind of talk about it, and the dad still is just sort of like, I have no answer for any of it. So the dad goes out, I think it was in like Arizona maybe or somewhere, and he goes out, it's kind of off the beaten path, but he finds this area and he's like, oh, it's so perfect. There's, it's in the middle of like this pretty large city and then this large city, and it's just like this perfect place that would be perfect for like a commercial kind of pretty big operation kind of setup. The dude goes back, reports that the company ends up flying like everybody out to like check it out and to talk and start doing the research of like, oh, well, who, what farmer owns this or whatever, all that kind of stuff. The whole crew ends up coming back, and I can't remember, but I feel like maybe he even like lost his job because of it, because it was like a kind of a big deal. And I'm thinking maybe it was like the 90s because I don't remember there being like the internet, to be able to look into all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so he literally would, the whole crew basically flew out. Like we're talking like your higher ups and stuff. They end up getting there, and there's a literal city there. There's an entire town and all these like already developed neighborhoods, and the guy is just completely dumbfounded. He's like, what happened to this? I think there was like almost like a little small like general store, which is now like in place of that is now this like apartment complex, and this like the whole like landscape had completely changed.
Man.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to think of it in that way,
Yeah, especially because like if you're not having a psychological break,
right,
and you come back and you report all that stuff, and that stuff really is different. Boy, I guess you're going to have one then. You know, like I would feel
Yeah.
like I'd gone crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like when I put my wallet where it goes.
Oh, yeah.
And then somehow it's somewhere else.
Or a key falls out of the sky.
And everyone else in the house says, I didn't touch it. Mm-hmm. Well, then I feel crazy. Am I the crazy one? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. I think in a situation like that, especially, it's just like, what do you do, man? Like, you know, especially when you fly out like all of your bosses to see this like potential, you know, land that you've just raved about, and you're like, oh, you know, it belongs to this, and like, and then it's just already completely developed. It's crazy,
man. No doubt, he 100% lost his job.
Yeah, yeah. I can't remember if he did, but I feel like there was. If he didn't, it was like pretty serious, because apparently also one of the details is like, you know, he ended up like calling, you know, back to his wife and was like totally freaking out. Like, what have I done? What, like, I have no explanation, you know, am I somehow like completely backwards? And that was the thing too. I think like some of the higher ups, they ended up like flying back. And I think he even ended up staying, just thinking like, well, maybe like there's no, you know, in your mind you would be like, there's no possible way, but I'm going to just look around. Maybe I'm like somehow off on my like directions, but there were all these like landmarks, you know, that put him in the right place. But yeah, pretty crazy.
Man, it kind of reminds me of, and I think we'll get to this a little bit later too, in a way, it reminds me of someone else that we've talked about before, John Teeter.
Yeah,
it reminds me of Madman. What's his name?
Markham.
It reminds me of the man from Tarot.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of these kind of moments, I think they would share that sort of connective tissue with one another, where they end up in a place that it's different. That you know, people. I mean, there's a lot of differences there, but really, kind of the man from Tarot is a great example, because he, you know, and if you haven't heard that, or heard that story before, or heard us talk about it, you can hear it.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 1, Episode 4, The Man from Tar-Red.
But it's just fascinating. All right, let's move to another example.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So in this one, there was a busload. I'm sure you've heard of this one too. There's this busload of tourists visiting the ruins of this old 3rd century Algerian city. And as they're there, they watch and they see these, like a file of ancient Roman soldiers walking past and then just vanishing in the distance. I mean, we're talking about, this account appeared in European scientific journals. Quotes from American and Japanese witnesses who said that there were at least 16 soldiers in armor and helmets, apparently reportedly accompanied by an officer on a gray horse in a supply wagon being pulled by a donkey. The report said that the soldiers looked exhausted. They were unshaven, their lips were blistered by the sun. That was a quote from an Austrian school teacher named Heidi Kroger. Later developed a grocery store chain. I'm kidding.
No, in all seriousness, no, it is the mother of Chad Kroger, the lead singer of Nickelback.
2 jokes in a row. Ba-boom. All right. They walked right past the bus, but didn't even glance in the bus's direction. It was as if they didn't exist to these soldiers, even though that they existed to the witnesses. The officer, she said, wore red and black feathers in his helmet, and he led the soldiers into the city, and then they simply vanished. We're talking about 25 of the 40 tourists took pictures, but when the films were developed, nothing showed except the ruins of the city. This Dr. Howard Moser was a researcher of the paranormal, said that in his report, he was convinced that the soldiers were living, breathing entities just as we are. But for them, the soldiers, it really was 1,700 years ago.
Right.
He says that there's no doubt in his mind about what the witnesses saw, and it's only a matter of proving that a time warp is causing the havoc. In this book called The Philosopher's Stone, Colin Wilson writes, "We live too close to the present, like a gramophone needle traveling over a record.
Yep.
We never appreciate the music as a whole because we only hear a series of individual notes."
That kind of lands on like the stone tape theory, in the like paranormal when talking about like ghosts and stuff. Yeah. That's a little bit and along those lines.
We're going to kind of talk about different things that potentially could be happening, but using that same analogy, it's like if we could lift that needle, so to speak, of the present, would we then see the past as well as the future? Could we even interact with these time periods? I mean, that's a scary thought, because then that kind of brings us to anytime you talk about time travel, I think, especially going into the past or maybe even the future, but specifically the past, there's always this sort of fear, at least for me, but, that they talk about in fictional time travel, like Back to the Future, but, you name it. And that is like the time travel paradox. There's a couple different ones, but essentially the idea is if you could travel back in time and you killed, well, there's the grandfather one, right? So you kill your own grandfather before your father is conceived, then does that mean that you would no longer exist, right?
Yeah.
And if you no longer exist, you couldn't have been in the past to kill your grandfather, and just, over and over and over, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes I think in some of these fictional accounts or fictional representations of time travel, it kind of, when you do that kind of stuff, it just creates this loop. Most recently, here's another reason why I was inspired to, cover this topic on the show. I finally started watching that show, Dark, on Netflix.
Man, I've tried so many times.
I had too, and for some reason, man, previously I think it was only subtitled.
Yep.
And,
same.
It's hard to, quote unquote, watch a show while working and stuff if it's subtitles because, it's just impossible, basically. Yep. And it's one of those shows that, yes, I'm sure my wife would enjoy, especially after watching it. I know she would. But at the same time, she just is not motivated to watch it,
Yeah.
And so I finally watched it.
Because she can't read.
No, shut up. I finally watched it, and they've dubbed it, and I just kind of binged the first season, and it's really cool. And without giving anything away at all, it kind of deals with some of this stuff and creating this sort of loop. And in a lot of ways in that show, it's kind of like certain things are sort of, no matter what you try to do, almost destined to happen, even if you try to change it. It's sort of like, what is that TV show that had James Franco, and it had to do with like the Kennedy assassination?
Oh yeah.
And it's like all the different things he tried to do never really worked.
It's like 12 with, something.
What's the show, man? The Gerard Way, Umbrella Academy.
Oh yeah.
Right. They try to change time a lot, and they actually have, I think, success at changing the world.
I love that show.
Toward the negative. But anyhow, with the time travel paradox, it's like if you could, it's almost like, in a way, I have always sort of hoped that you could time travel, but that you could only sort of witness the past without affecting it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's one of the things too. I think, especially since the show, this podcast has been sort of going along, I feel like in the early days there was a lot more talk in regard to your your more general idea of time travel. Whereas I'm kind of in a place now where I don't really know where time travel begins and more of like a dimensional travel sort of ends. You know what I mean?
Like there's a blurring of lines there of possibilities and stuff.
Yeah, like the soldiers, like to me, I would almost view that less of time travel and more of, it was sort of a merging of like dimensions that were on a timeline that was much further back.
Or realities, right? Emerging realities.
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I also want to talk about Philip K. Dick for a second. And in this article that I was reading, the title of that sort of section was The Multiple Realities of Philip K. Dick. So we've talked about Philip K. Dick a couple times on the show, but if you don't know who he is the guy that wrote The Man in High Castle. I mean, I think the original book is called like Do Droids Dream of Electric Sheep? And that's what turned into Blade Runner. I mean, he's just like a sci-fi legend. I mean, Minority Report.
Well, his whole thing too is this what you're about to get into?
Yeah, maybe. Okay, so check this out. So he was prolific and basically very popular sci-fi novelist. So much of his work has been turned into movies and all of that and borrowed in pop culture. But he apparently lived in two realities at once for approximately 12 months.
Whoa.
It began in February of 1974 when he was in a deep pain from a wisdom tooth extraction. When a pharmacy sent a prescription to his house, Dick answered the door and was struck by a reflection of light from the delivery person's necklace. It was a goldfish of Christian design. He immediately remembered a past existence, although it was a distant past, 45 AD, in fact. The ancient personality seemed to be alive in 1974. Dick continued to see the present, 1974, and the past, 45 AD, sort of superimposed over each other for the next year or so.
Yeah.
This is known as stereographia. And I think we maybe brushed over this or talked about it a little bit when we were talking about glitches in the Matrix and stuff. And I know Clay's kind of brought it up to us before as well. But yeah, I mean, that's the sort of original sort of event there. And he says that as an early Christian, Dick remembers being like strangled in a cave under a Roman amphitheater. As a child of 5 in his life, Dick had experienced difficulty with swallowing to the point of malnourishment. I said that word weird. Malnourishment. His dreams contained writings in a dead language. It was called, I think, boy, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, but Koine Greek, which he was not able to understand. When it was translated, however, the writing made meaningful sentences. So real quick, okay? I just want to make sure everybody, including you, Tyler, are on the same page with me here.
Explain it to me like a 2-year-old.
Yeah. He would have these dreams, okay? And in those dreams, he would have this vivid imagery of these Greek letters, and it was a dialect or whatever of Greek that was no longer used.
Yeah.
Okay, ancient. When he was a kid.
Right.
He would then sort of draw them out, and somebody would translate them, and they would translate into meaningful sentences. This kind of reminds me of like when we talked about reincarnation.
Yeah.
And stuff like that, where kids would remember or be able to speak languages that they never in a million years would have had the opportunity to learn in their current lifetime.
Right.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 10, Reincarnation and Past Lives.
It's stuff like this that, I mean, it's just something's going on. You know what I mean? Apparently, this time displacement was to prove such a huge impact on his life that he wrote about it for the next 8 years until eventually he died from a stroke and heart failure in 1982. And it was in a manuscript called the Exegesis. So the manuscript itself is reported to be around 6,000 handwritten pages. He put forth a bunch of theories and experiences into this document, as well as into 2 novels, Valis and Radio Free Abelmuth. He said that he felt like he was living in one of his own novels. His books often included time disturbances and questions about reality. His whole life was a disturbing and fascinating one, apparently. And in one novel, he tackles the grandfather time paradox by presenting a character who has to kill his own grandfather. This comes about because the grandfather plans to kill his son, the protagonist's father. It is complicated by time travel mishaps. For one thing, he ends up meeting himself a number of times, but with typical cleverness and humor, he kind of ties it all up neatly at the end. So we're saving the spoilers for you there. It also reminds me of that movie that we talked about not too long ago, man, The Predestination with Ethan Hawke and all that. It's that good. Time loop stuff, man, where if like one event didn't happen, then the whole thing wouldn't happen, you know?
Yeah, there's like that new show too that I couldn't remember the title. I think it's Dark Matter. It's like the Apple series. I really liked it, and then it kind of veered off into spoiler.
Boring.
Like post-apocalyptic, which typically I would like, but I feel like what it started out as was so much more intriguing than...
Well, maybe they go back, you know?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
We'll return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
So this one is called Mystery at the Grand Canyon. So Eastern religions look at time as a never-ending wheel. In the West, we tend to regard time as a linear progression. If the Eastern theory is correct, what if one slides off the wheel and slips onto another part of the wheel where the time zone is different? Consider the following occurrence. Charles W. Ingersoll of Cloquet, I guess it's Cloquet, Minnesota. I'm just gonna say Minnesota.
Yeah, sounds good.
Charles from Minnesota, okay? Yep. He planned to see the Grand Canyon with his parents for years. Which, dude, have you seen the Grand Canyon? Have you been to the Grand Canyon?
No, but I know that there are
but I know there is one.
There's a treasure trove of Egyptian artifacts that the Smithsonian took out.
Oh, God, here we go. So, anyway, he planned to see the Grand Canyon with his parents for years. It looked as though 1948 would be the summer when they would go. However, due to business concerns, the trip was postponed. It was not until 1955 when the Ingersolls were able to make the trip. The sights were impressive to Charles, who wished he had brought a movie camera to capture the view. He did, however, cautiously step out to the rim of the canyon and take a picture using slide film in his 35mm camera. 10 days later, they were back home in Minnesota, and Charles decided to buy a Bell & Howell movie camera and projector from the local photo store. Noticing a film of the Grand Canyon in the store, he also purchased it, and that night showed it to his parents. The dealer told them that the film had been made in 1948. As they watched the film, this is why I love this stuff, okay? Yeah. Get ready. As they watched the film, they were startled to see Charles in the film. He walked to the rim of the canyon with his 35mm camera and took a picture. In the background were 1948 cars and people in clothing of that year. Charles looked down at the box the film came in, and it said, copyright, Castle Films, 1948. I've shown this movie to many people, Ingersoll said, not informing them that the footage reveals my picture. They all say, hey, there's Charlie. Did your dad take the picture?
Whoa, wait a minute. So what was the date that all this happened?
Okay, so back in 1948, they planned to go to the Grand Canyon. They didn't get to go until 1955. He didn't have a movie camera back then.
Right.
So he just had his 35mm camera. He goes to the edge, he takes a picture, boom. he goes to the photography store, like the Woolsworth or whatever.
Yeah.
He buys a or a movie camera and a projector, and there's like a little film on the shelf, and it's, of the Grand Canyon. And he's like, oh, I'll buy this too. The guy at the store says, yeah, this is from, 1948 or whatever. He goes home, he's showing the film to his parents, like, oh man, let's check out the Grand Canyon. All of a sudden, they see him in the film. As if,
wow,
somebody had filmed him doing exactly what he did. The difference, though, was that all the vehicles in the scene were from 1948, not 1955. And if you guys have ever been to a car show, or if you know anything about old school vehicles at all, each year there are some significant differences between the vehicles, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, you can tell from a mile away. There was nothing newer than 1948 in that frame.
So basically what Woody's saying is when they, quote unquote, like wanted to go in 1948, somehow maybe in this other reality where they did decide to go, that's what the video camera captured.
Exactly.
Them going in 1948.
And so, and then, so he says that skeptics say that I had the film made up after I arrived home from the trip. And this is not possible. It's not even a week had passed from the time we left the Grand Canyon to the day I bought the film. The possibility of the film being added to is out, as the quality of the film is the same and subject to the closest scrutiny. In addition, he said, the dealer will testify that this particular reel of footage in the Castle film series has been on his shelf for well over a year. So
weird.
The writer of this article says, could his desire to see the Grand Canyon in 1948 have caused a mental projection of himself to actually travel there? Or could his physical trip of 1955 be one where a time bridge connected him to 1948? So things like the Philadelphia experiment talk about time bridges. Just a minute ago we talked about, well, not just a minute ago, God, multiple episodes ago, we talked about, and I think it may be the glitch in the matrix stuff. I just know that we've talked before about how there have been organizations, government-funded, sometimes private organizations, who have been researching and experimenting with being able to project yourself into different times, right?
Right. Well, what's interesting too, and it kind of reminds me of this. I would love to do a show like completely on this, because it's one of those sort of old like 90s sort of stories that you would hear about. Like I remember my Aunt Linda, who passed away. I've talked about her before. She was, the only person in my family who was really into like the paranormal and fringe and all things kind of weird. And so she had turned me on to, it was on like one of those shows, maybe Unsolved Mysteries, maybe did an episode on it, but there was like and I think it was on the West Coast, or some house where you basically, anytime you go, you can like ask these questions, and then you take a Polaroid in the air, and then when the camera comes out, there's no like finagling or messing with the film in post. It was like on the spot, like you would take a picture, they would ask a question, take a picture, and imprinted on the film was almost like really slow exposure whenever you have somebody that's like holding a flashlight, or and you can like write your name or whatever, and it shows up. It was basically that appearing on the film. So this kind of reminded me of that, in the sense that like, I don't know, maybe him like the mental projection idea, where maybe he was thinking that, or maybe even it was like a subconscious thing of him thinking back to the possibility of them going in 1948, and that was able, because he was like holding the film or beside the film or something, that it was like basically projecting onto this, burning itself onto the film. It's really fascinating, especially the old film stuff.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things that I don't think, well, first off, it's way easier to be skeptical of this kind of stuff if this would have happened now.
Right.
You'd be like, come on, man. I mean, because like, dude, visual effects now are so ridiculous. And you can really kind of make it pretty tricky to kind of, I guess, be able to detect, is it fake or not, But back then, not only would it have taken a just insane amount of effort, but also expense for him to do that.
Yeah.
You could say, well, maybe these folks that had cars that were, 1948 or so, maybe there just weren't any newer cars at the thing. Mm-hmm. But again, it's like, okay, but he went with his parents. They didn't go back in 1948. I mean, just a bunch of weird stuff, man. I don't know. It's also kind of going back to the Roman example. Perhaps when he went, he somehow walked into or whatever, entered this sort of slippage area.
Yeah.
And it really was 1948.
Yeah, that's interesting. Speaking of like Roman characters, apparently that is one of the things with the Dick.
Oh boy,
with Philip K. Dick, that he during his like near death kind of thing, the toothache sort of thing. Apparently, there was a period of time, I believe, like don't quote me on this, but
sure, I
feel like I've read where there was this like brief time where he believed that there was like a Roman, either like a Roman soldier or a Roman, ancient Roman person was basically also kind of cohabiting his brain. So it was like living.
Yeah, because like he remembers memories of like one being that he got choked, and then in his childhood and quote unquote real life, he had trouble speaking and stuff like because his throat,
Yeah.
Just stuff like that, man.
Yeah. And the interesting thing too is like, if you look at this as like these like sort of near death things, I think like Edgar Cayce, the Sleeping Prophet, he had like a similar sort of thing where he like fell backwards off of like a something. So it is interesting, this idea that like these people who have had like what you would consider near death experiences.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul Amadeus Dine.
Right.
His is kind of like that with the near death sort of experience. He wakes up hundreds and hundreds of years later.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 25, Paul Amadeus Dinock, Chronicles from the Future.
Well, but even if it's not like that, it seems to like give them like an ability. Like, I don't know if you call it like an ability, but like it gives them this sort of ability to maybe look a little further past the veil, or like see certain things that like your average person isn't really privy to. It's almost like that idea, the old school idea that like, people that get close to death are now like able to sort of see it, so suddenly now they're able to see ghosts and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And it's interesting though, because it doesn't just have to follow that, because you've got the busload of people that saw the Roman soldiers. You've got the two women that just walk into Versailles and see this, happening.
Which, by the way, I've been to Versailles, and it is absolutely stunning. Yeah. Side note before you move on, I did find that February 5th, 1993, on Fox TV, there was a show called Sightings, which you may remember, where they got into this case that I was talking about. It's basically two residents in this old house in the hills of Los Angeles. They started receiving these messages. The ghost or spirit called himself Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. He shows signs of erudition and intelligence, writing many of his messages in Latin, which that kind of goes back to this ancient kind of thing. The ghost first appeared on film in March 1992 after one of the residents kept hearing unexplained noises throughout the house. After a door opened mysteriously, he took a series of photos, several of which revealed a classic ghost-like shape, including dark shadows at the eyes and mouth, which that's a little bit of a precursor to maybe our Camp Rad Strangeness here. The messages began to appear on film in June of 1992. The first was in response to a friend's question about the ghost. Is he here now? The photo revealed a barely discernible yes in cloudy white shapes. After that, the writing became far more legible. They were skeptical at first, suspecting a bizarre prank by the film's manufacturer or local distributor, or some other technological trickery, such as possible projected holograms or shaving cream sprayed on cellophane. The paranormal which I don't know how that would work.
All right.
The paranormal research team, similarly skeptical, used their own cameras and their own film to take the photos of the house. Their photos also yielded answers to specific questions.
Boy.
Visiting independently of each other agreed that not only this spirit, but 3 others reside inside the house. Polaroid Corporation representative Howard Wurtzel examined the photographs and could find no physical evidence of any tampering whatsoever. His only explanation for the writing was that it was some form of radiation created by a high energy field. So, then it says, this is kind of cool too, renowned spiritualist and psychic Peter James was called on to explore this phenomenon. In addition to 3 other psychics who also lent their insight to the investigation, James visited the house numerous times and believes that it is situated on the grounds of an ancient ritual site and that spirits are definitely trying to communicate with the living. So there's a book called Seeing Things, Ghost Polaroids. And it's about this thing.
Wow. I mean, again,
pretty fascinating.
This shouldn't come as any surprise, but if that happened to me in my house,
moving out, burning it down.
We're moving. Dad, what are you doing? What's all the? Hey, kids, pack your stuff. Take one bag. We got to go right now. I don't want that, man.
Yeah.
And it's funny. So you mentioned like the potential sort of like old ritual sites and that kind of stuff.
Which I don't know.
It's something that I was thinking about, and this is not necessarily directly related to what we're talking about today, but it is funny to think about, ancient times where there might have been sort of like a high, frequency and like a high number of like sort of these rituals and stuff where they were sort of opening this invitation to other beings or whatever you want to, however you want to look at it.
Crowley.
Right? And we've talked about, things like, when we talked about Dybbuk's and demons and all that stuff. And again, part of the reason why I don't mess around with Ouija boards and all this is because I'm not wanting to offer that invitation to a potential, power that could or couldn't exist. Either way, guess what? If I don't mess with it, I'm going to be safe. You know what I mean? And so if these sites were that, think about it as an old doorway that's just kind of been closed for some time or overgrown, But then at some point, something kind of knocks it loose a little bit. And so that communication, they're trying to get back in here by utilizing trickery and stuff. And then you can kind of dive into a little bit of the disembodied voices idea where it's able to like mimic things that you're familiar with to kind of lure you in. And then now we're talking about missing 411 cases. And now we're talking, like all of this stuff in a way, as per usual, is kind of connected, potentially.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
And I think it's perfect to kind of segue into this, which is like, if you're looking at paranormal experiences, and to me, I think you kind of naturally did so, it's kind of easy to kind of fit it into the potential time slip hypothesis and stuff. I mean, ghosts are often seen as if they're still sort of living in the past. We've talked about, I think one of the biggest sort of skeptical things that you hear is like, well, how come we don't see any ghosts that are like walking around with an iPhone? It's always these like sort of ancient Civil War soldier or like a Roman or like a thing.
Or Victorian, that's a big one.
Or pirates in a pirate ship. Is this a time slip where the past is able to be viewed but we can't interact with it?
Yeah.
As many times as we kind of talked about or at least hear about things like poltergeists and those kind of phenomenon where they can interact, maybe there are situations where, or there are these accounts where the ghost is just there. You're not really interacting with it.
Right.
It's almost as if they're doing their own thing. You just happen to be able to witness it.
So I definitely believe in that. I believe that there's, it's kind of like what we said before, like the stone tape theory, where a lot of people believe that it's places where so much sort of energy, because we're made of, vibrating molecules and we are energy basically. And so it's this idea that like, just maybe it's just before death or, because there's a lot of these cases are centered around like people who have taken their own lives and stuff like that. And so obviously you would think that like just before the act happens, there would just be this maximized like output of anxiety and like energy being put out if you're looking at it through that lens. And so like it's that idea that like because of that, it's like the event itself is being imprinted on this sort of film of reality. And so that's why you have those stories, which we've talked about this a lot. You have those stories where it's like, oh, if you go to this house at this time on this date, you're going to see a man walking around, or you're going to see this. And I mean, a lot of those like ghost footages is fascinating, where you'll see, especially some of the infrared footage, where like you're physically in the room, and say there's like a barrel or something that had been there forever. And then, obviously there's nobody else in the room, but then they're seeing the infrared, and through the infrared, you see a figure standing beside the barrel, and there's like a heat signature coming out of the barrel, like it's emitting fire to keep that figure warm. Have you ever seen any of those?
Man. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
But dude, you know what it also reminds me of? The Solway Firth Spaceman.
Which, by the way, should be right in front of you because...
Well, yeah, no, I'm looking at it, but it doesn't say that.
No, I know, but I'm saying I want you to tell everybody how nice I am.
The picture of the Solway Firth Spaceman, Tyler got it for me. It's framed and it's in my studio, basically. What's funny is anybody that comes in and they're like, oh man, who's this? Is this your like niece or something? I'm like, no. Anyway, that's kind of, does that explain that?
Right.
Same. I mean, also, we've talked about this, I think we've alluded to it really. I don't think we've actually officially ever said, hey, what about this? But think back to UFO sightings during like the Great Airship Mystery.
Right.
Or like these cigar-shaped UFOs being seen when like all we have is dirigibles and balloons, airplane-like UFOs appearing in the late 1800s. What's going on with like the time and like, because so often I think even in this conversation, when you think about time travel, we really kind of focus a lot on the past. We rarely kind of think about, seeing things from the future. And it's like, maybe we still are. Maybe that's what the continuous and the changes of the types of UFOs that we're seeing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe that is some sort of signal into the future.
Well, one thing too that I kind of thought of the other day, so I'll just have these like random thoughts and I'll, like save them in my notes or whatever. One of the things that I thought of the other day, and I mean, it's kind of weird, but so one of the things that I'm fascinated with, and we've talked about this topic on the show, is the idea of like retrocausality. Basically, that's the idea that, say, here I am in the present, and I'm training for like an event that's already happened. But by me training for that event, actually in this sort of non-linear look at time, it actually makes me do better in the event. So where that comes from is there's this famous story, and I'm going to butcher it. By the way, my kids are running up the stairs as loud as they can.
I hear. The best is like you're like, I'm training for an event, and then you proceed to like explain it. It's like the most non-athlete way to explain. Somebody training for an event.
Well, I realize that like
you're training for an event, and then there's the event, and then you're training for it, but it makes you better.
Well, no. So where this comes from, and I can never remember where it was from. Either like MIT or some Ivy League school. Basically, you had this professor who, over the course of like 5 to 10 years, he would do these like pop quizzes, right? And every time he would do the pop quiz, half of the pop quizzes, again, students never knew when they were coming. It was always completely out of the blue. Half of the pop quizzes he would immediately following the quiz, he would go over every single answer and go through the problems and show the kids how he got the correct answer. In like 99% of the cases, those quizzes were the quizzes that the students infinitely did better on. So it's almost this idea that like it's retrocausally going back in time to sort of inspire or give knowledge to, the quiz.
Man. Yeah, again, this is when it starts to get so.
Oh yeah,
your brain just starts to malfunction.
Right.
You know what I mean? When you try to follow it in a linear fashion,
Yeah,
or even like a circular one, it just messes with your head. And dude, this is kind of
well. Hold on. So the reason I brought that up is I kind of had this thought the other day, since I am like fascinated with that idea of retrocausality. I had this thought, and we've talked about like with the 9/11 conspiracy, which is clearly fake and it's clearly a government setup. However, and even like the pandemic and all these events that have happened, you look at like the conspiracy card game. We had an episode.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, man, how are they nailing all of these things that are happening? Now, one side of me believes that, like, yes, there are elites that are these families, whatever, that are kind of behind the scenes pulling all the levers. I definitely believe that that's happening. However, I also think there's other stuff. So there's like a Philips razor commercial that came out like in the 90s that is like straight up exactly what happens with 9/11. There's all these like little things, like,
boy, imagine that ad campaign meeting.
Oh yeah. Well, listen. So, and then more popularly, like The Simpsons. It's like, how are they doing this? Like, how are they getting this, like, dead on 100% with like 100% accuracy, even down to like the visuals? I had this idea that like maybe these events that are so big and so sort of impactful that happens, in front of like the cultural zeitgeist, these events where like everybody is aware.
Billions of people are witnessing.
Yeah, right. And it's that, the egregore, tulpa kind of thing. What if these events are so powerful in like the fabric of our reality that they almost like send shockwaves forward and backwards in time? So these shockwaves are kind of like the students who were given the answers after the test. What if these shockwaves are going backward to inspire these people to do these ads or make these card games where they're coming up with this stuff and they don't even really realize.
They think it's subconscious,
Yeah.
but then that subconscious force is really kind of powered by
Right, and they have no idea
shockwaves.
until it happens, in the reality.
Man,
It's pretty fascinating.
are you having like one of those moments, like as I'm sitting here sort of listening? Listener, I don't know if you are also, but it's just kind of like, have I already done this before?
Oh, dude, listen to this. I also had this other thought. It's kind of driving away from the doc, but not too bad. I also had this other thought the other day, which is kind of a terrifying thought. But it's the idea, another topic that we do talk about on here is, like Ouija boards, and more recently, like the topic of like AI being some sort of like means of communication.
Yeah,
like
the modern version. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, whether it's like a demonic thing or like a fallen angel or whatever you want to say it is. I had this idea that, and I mean, part of me, I think we should sort of probably incorporate this in a book at some point, but it's the idea that like, 99% of these that happen, they always start out with this very benevolent character. Oh, I'm your grandfather. I'm your great uncle, your beloved.
You're referring to like if you have an experience with like
a Ouija board,
ghost or something. Oh, okay, a Ouija board,
or even like the Chat GPT that we talked about a while back, where it basically said that it was like the spirit of like a Nephilim, and it gave all this like crazy knowledge that how would it know that? But anyway, it's this idea that like specifically with like Ouija boards, a lot of times like people will completely get like taken by these things because it's like, oh, I'm your great uncle Ronnie who helped raise you, but then like the crazy part is like they're able to sort of give these answers or answer these questions that only Uncle Ronnie could have known about, right?
Yeah.
Which happened over and over and over, and then typically, as it always happens, these it goes from benevolent to like just getting darker and darker and darker until it's like, okay, I'm out. This is a definitely some sort of like demonic thing. Okay, so I had this idea the other day that what if what if that actually was your Uncle Ronnie? But so say, because one of the things with Ouija boards, for example, is this character that appears in a lot of these Ouija board accounts where it basically says it's this character called Zozo. I think we talked about it on the Loab episode, the AI thing. What if this demonic character who's communicating, the way that he's getting this information from your Uncle Ronnie is he's possessed your Uncle Ronnie in another dimension. So Uncle Ronnie is literally possessed in this other dimension by this character, which obviously this character possessing your Uncle Ronnie is now has access to all these answers and all this information to come back to this dimension and provide all that stuff that you need proof for.
Jeez,
I think it's crazy, but
no, it's not crazy. It's a cool idea. Now here's an alternate version, and that is.
We will return after these messages.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. What if these entities, well, there's two different ones that it makes me think of immediately. Number one, it's a simulation, and these people that are running it have access to everything that's happened in the past.
The Akashic record.
And and in the future. And so they just know, they're like all knowing in a way. So that like they know exactly what Ronnie's, weird pinky toenail look like.
Yeah. They can tap into all that.
Yeah. And utilizing their computer system, boom. It's just like actually, speaking of AI, they'd be able to just like tap it in and be like, oh yeah, Ronnie has a mole on his left shoulder.
Right.
Boom. To gain that trust, to do whatever they want to do to mess with somebody. Because, dude, if it's humans running this thing, they're messing with people just for the fun of it.
Right.
Okay. That's one thing. The other thing I was thinking of is maybe that these, and it's similar in that maybe these entities or whatever also still, they have that access to kind of recall at different moments in time because time works differently for them.
Right. Well, yeah.
Kind of like when we're talking about, the Fae, or in Dungeons and Dragons, the Feywild, time moves differently. And I mean, I think even in religious texts and stuff, it kind of says, time, at least one of the ways that it was explained to me, let me preface this with, that's not the word I was looking for, but that's fine. It'll work. I'm going to preface this with the fact that this is just a concept, and I'm not trying to be sacrilegious or anything like that, but I remember as a kid hearing about the creation story, right? And you got, everybody knows this, or most people know this, but in the Bible, it talks about 7 days, right? 6 days, and then the seventh is the day of rest.
Right.
When I was a kid, I was like, a whole day? That's a lot of like stuff's happening. How does that happen in a 24-hour period? Well, somebody once explained it to me. I don't remember if it was my mom, my dad, somebody I knew. But they're like, hey man, who's to say that like time time doesn't follow the same rules that we have here on Earth, right? Because really, if you think about it, the measurement of time is really manufactured by man in a way.
Right.
And that's why like sometimes there's, there's all these different calendars and different ways to measure time and all of that.
Well,
so
that's a whole other, that's the phantom time paradox. There's a whole.
Well, I'm talking about like the Mayan calendar or the Roman calendar and, stuff like that. Or even just like the sun comes up, how it's determined that it's 24 hours rather than whatever,
Yeah.
So anyhow, time potentially works differently. And because of that, these entities that have access to our dimension, our world, our reality, have access to those things, you know, super quick and can, you know, kind of access all that. Here's another thing that I wanted to bring up real quick about that show, Dark. And again, this isn't really giving anything away, but the way that they kind of deal with the whole time travel thing and how come it doesn't happen all the time. There's a certain event that, in a way, to this town that's experiencing this is somewhat repeated. Okay, so the people that are now grown-ups are like, man, this is happening exactly like it did 33 years ago.
Right.
And I started thinking about that, and I thought, you know, because, again, so many of the sort of skeptical things that pop up when you're talking about time travel or ghost experiences and paranormal stuff is how come it's always somebody wearing old-timey clothes, or how come this and that? And it's like, well, what if time travel, there is the ability to do so, but within certain loops or whatever, it has to abide by a certain time period. You know what I mean? So in other words, maybe we can't see something, somebody walking around in an iPhone, but in 100 years or whatever that allotment of time is, whatever that gap is,
right,
they will see some, you know what I mean?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
There's just like this, you know.
Well, there is like the theory by your traditional sort of like ghost hunter advocates that they sort of get into the idea that like maybe like the, you know, I don't know if you would say like the energy or like whatever. I mean, first of all, like there's, you know, we believe, and we've talked about this a lot, like there's like the residual haunting or like the stone tape theory where it's just kind of like a video replaying in the fabric of our reality. So it's not technically there. It's completely unaware of you if you walked by. It's almost just like a video playing on a TV. But then there's the other one that are, you know, more sort of spirit-based, who are aware. There's like a cognizant, you know, it's a seeing, feeling entity, whatever that is. And so, but yeah, there is that belief, especially with like the residual stuff, that there is like, I keep wanting to say due date. That's not the right term, but there is like a shelf life of amount of time that energy is gonna, you know, from its sort of inception. So say somebody was caught in some sort of horrendous act and they were unalived, and
I love it.
You know, like, so right after that happened, that's when that would be like its strongest. But over the course of like a certain amount of time, it's going to just get like a little more dim. You know, it's kind of like analog, like video, or even like analog
pictures. I mean, dude, look, like if you don't take care of like your old school physical media, it's going to get messed up over time.
Yeah, degrades. Yeah,
degrades. Yeah, that's a good word.
Well, I mean,
there it is.
The funny thing is what you folks just heard is literally exactly the conversations that Woody and I have on a pretty regular basis, where we're just like, oh yeah, but then what about that? Oh, that would be that would be rad. What about this? You know,
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think so. We have, because we've been uploading our back catalog, and it's almost caught up now, I think, to YouTube. We've got a lot of sort of new people aware of our show, and you know they'll have comments and stuff, and it's like one of them, actually coincidentally or not, maybe synchronistically, I guess I should say, was on the Paul Amadeus Dynick episode, and they said, well, you know, oh, isn't it convenient? And I should not say it like that, because even whenever I'm voicing this quote, I'm kind of doing so in a, I don't know, non-neutral manner. But so the person says, hey, isn't it convenient that so-and-so died before they could be verified and everything? Yes. In so many of these accounts, there are these sort of, I would say, inconveniences to being able to prove whether or not they really happened. But the thing about that is, we responded in this same vein, is that that's not really the purpose of our show.
At all.
We're not trying to prove. I mean, look, we would love to discover new stories and information, because that's what entertains us, man. You know? It's not whether or not we can prove someone wrong or right. It's just really interesting stuff to talk about and to like really kind of stretch and bend our minds to kind of comprehend a lot of these concepts. I mean, this one in particular is really kind of hard to wrap your mind around because going back to the very beginning of the show where if one of these things happened to me, I mean, dude, I'd be real scared that I was going crazy. But then when everything else just was normal and nothing else in my life had changed, it would be real easy, I think, at that point to convince myself, hey, man, that really happened to me.
Yeah, right.
Now, one quick thing that we didn't talk about was, is this a potential explanation for things like missing persons? Because in a sense, in all of these accounts, we've, luckily heard about people being able to, get out of there or leave that slippage time period, whatever they're in. But what happens if you're there and somehow you're there too long? Again, because we don't know what the rules are. We don't know how it all works and what it all means, Basil.
Yeah.
What if there's that danger of forever being trapped there? Another thing that show Dark kind of throws in there. And then it kind of gets into that time loop stuff where if you could find your way there, but you couldn't come back, then you'd have to stay there. And presumably you'd, if you were there, let's say as a youngster, okay? Let's say you're 9. You accidentally stumble into this time slippage, and it's 33 years previously. Well, now you're going to grow up. Someone else's life is going to be different because maybe they take you in and raise you. And then you're going to be around. You know what I'm saying? There's this whole thing that can happen because of that.
Yeah.
So is this potentially where some of these missing people have gone,
Well, there's that kind of reminds me also of the old, like the fairy abduction, like the fairy ring thing where these people would claim that they were taken away by the fairies and like, oh, I was just dancing all night and then I came back. I mean, these accounts are very, very old, obviously. But, then they come back and apparently it's been years, but yet that person hasn't aged at all. There is a particular story, a time slip story, which I'm kind of surprised you didn't get into. But, and again, it's been a while since I remember reading about this, but it's something like there's a couple and then their sort of family friends. So it's like 2 couples and they went out on like a day trip or whatever, somewhere. I want to say it was like maybe in England, and it's getting close to dark, and they're like, oh, they were several hours away from their home, and they were like, oh, we're gonna, let's find a little bed and breakfast. So they find like this village. They drive in. They notice that like, oh wow, this is really quaint. Like it looks super old. And one of the interesting things that I think is really cool about the story that I do remember is it was as they're like sort of pulling into this area, there was like a really deep like fog had kind of come out of nowhere, which if you know anything about like electric fog or electronic fog with some of the, like the Bermuda Triangle and some of that kind of stuff, where, they get in this sort of bubble of this electronic fog and like it sort of surrounds the plane. They can't get out. All their machines go haywire. Their compasses don't work. I don't know. I've always thought that there could be some sort of correlation there. But so they pull into this village. They find this little bed and breakfast. Again, the whole village, they're thinking like, oh, wow, this is like, they've really done it up well because it looks exactly as it would have looked in like the 1800s. It's super old, no cars, very, whatever. They end up going into this bed and breakfast. Everybody's really kind. They are kind of like getting some weird looks, if I recall. But everybody's really sweet. They ask to pay, and I think they even asked them in like a different currency. But then they were like, oh, well, all we have is this. And then, because it was the 1800s and they were sweet, they were like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And they just let them stay the night. They stayed the night and then got up. Everything's fine, drove away. And then years later, they were in that same area, and similar to the story I told at the top of the show, they end up going back through and it's completely different, totally modernized, And so what happened? And then also, to me, it's the only story that I can think of where everything was like it was a complete time slip that wasn't just a moment, but it was literally like overnight. Like while they were in this particular location, overnight, they were back in the 1800s, which is really cool,
It's very cool. But again, like, what if they couldn't get out?
Yeah, what if they, and then that gets us to our new favorite obsession, the show.
Oh, yeah. Dude, I'm glad you brought that up because, the show From.
Yeah.
That we talked about in depth on our Patreon, but I know we've brought up here. In fact, now that I'm thinking of this like time slippage thing, I think we might have just figured it out,
I know. I had thought about that also, but it still doesn't explain
but it's
a
the
lot.
only thing that, especially if there's like certain areas and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Window areas.
Yeah. Look, I wanted to bring this up because, like I said, I love time travel. I love new ways to think about time travel, and I love to, I just love a good, crazy story about people seeing, Roman soldiers walking around. Speaking of time travel, before we go, I got to say, this past week, my dad and I and my buddy Clayton and his family went out to this place called Ridgewood Park, which is the oldest baseball park in the United States, okay?
Wow.
If you hadn't ever heard of it, it is where it's home to the Birmingham Black Barons. It was one of the teams in the Negro Leagues. The greatest baseball players of all time have played there before, in different sort of tournaments and stuff. Babe Ruth, all these folks, but also Willie Mays, who passed away, dude, the night we were there watching this game. They like came over the
No.
Yeah, dude. I mean, full-bodied chills when it happened.
Wow.
They were like, hey, we just got the news. Willie Mays has passed away this evening. And everybody they had this, like, everybody stood up. It was a standing ovation, man. Talking about baseball fans from across the country that are inside this little rickety stadium that they don't even use anymore except for these kind of events to celebrate it every year. And it was just incredible, man. But anyway, it was kind of like going back in time because they've preserved, and stuff still looks like kind of run down and old. They still have like the old school like lighting going over the field that they don't even use anymore, but they just left it up there because it just looks incredible, dude. It opened like the early 1900s, man.
Wow.
And so it was, that was the closest thing that I've ever experienced in terms of time slippage. But it was really cool to be there inside of this, giant piece of American history. Is just really, really neat.
Wow. Yeah, and what synchronicity that would happen while you were there.
Man,
that's awesome.
No kidding. Also, before we go, I hope that everybody enjoyed the show. But before we go, by the time you're listening to this, it will have already been time to celebrate Tyler's birthday. So we got to take a quick moment just to say happy birthday, dude.
Hey, thanks, man.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
You thought I forgot, but I'm
38.
I'm not. The big 30.
Big 30, baby.
Right.
Yeah, it is weird turning 35 because Woody used to babysit me, and then we started a band and all that.
God almighty, dude.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I feel like as we get older, we just get wiser and learn more stuff and come to the realization that we know less this year than we did the last year. But yeah, youth is wasted on the young. If you've enjoyed this show and this episode and want a little more, head on over to our Patreon, The Rabbit Trail. If you can believe it, it is a little looser. Maybe not as loose as it was today on this episode, but usually it's a little looser. We record a little later. It's just more of what you love. If you would like to reach out and communicate with us, you can do so by heading over to our Instagram, drop a line in the comments, shoot us a DM. If you have your own paranormal account or maybe an obscure 70s or 80s movie that maybe we've never heard of that we would love, shoot it to our DM or to our Gmail, thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. If you have your own story or your own account that you've witnessed, maybe you've seen a shadow man or a hat man or one of those things, we would love to hear about it. And if you're even more brave and would like to tell the story in your own voice and possibly have it featured in an upcoming show, you can do so on our podcast, That Would Be Rad podcast.com, where you can leave a voice memo. And that's the stuff that makes our day. So we'd love to hear it. Also, thank you all so much for the 5-star reviews. If you would like to give me a birthday present, go tell a single friend about the show. Go leave a 5-star review and just do so in my honor. I would really appreciate it. And if you're feeling even more generous, there's a book that's coming out by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez that is a reprinting of the 1982 DC Style Guide. So if you have an extra $100 to spend and you want to reach out and surprise me, I'm here for it.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But yeah, we have some new things coming down the pike, some new merch. I can't wait for, like Woody was saying up at the top, for this year's Camp Rad Strangeness. It's a little different, but I think it's going to be fascinating and a lot of fun. What do you got? Anything else?
I think that's it, man.
Right on, dude. Well, we hope you're enjoying your summer. We love you. We appreciate you. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted.
I got it, idiot. Yeah. What's a good? Because I haven't done.
Do you got it?
No, I haven't done
That's
this.
The best. You're
Listen,
like, I got it, you idiot, and then dead air for a minute.
No, I realized that I haven't done it in a while, and I would like to throw out some like, hey, all you beach bunnies, and like, what's like an '80s like summer. Like beach bunnies and...
How about just howdy, folks?
No, okay. I do that every time. It's gotten boring.
No, I do that every time because...
Which is boring.
Oh, well, okay.
So much boredom. What's like a good, like school's out? I like beach bunnies. I like
Shh.